now. The moment that I've waited for now is what I was created for now. I'm gonna let you know what I'm feeling now. I must be quite emphatical. I'm feeling plain ecstatical. Wow. I might just float right up to the ceiling. The joy inside me, the smile you see, it's for one reason alone. The time and place where I want to be is holy hot damn, right where I am now. The past is too historical now. The future needs an oracle now. Is when you feel euphorical. Trust me, your crowning achievement, your greatest prize will come on the day that you realize the moment you're living for. Wow, is now.
Hi, everybody out there. Well, in this, as they put it, crazy world, particularly crazy country, I'm going to interview tonight Stephen Schwartz. I've known him for years. I've gone through different sociological changes in our culture and checked in on him because of it. Some of this I remember, some of this I don't. He's a scientist, a futurist, an award-winning author. He's a distinguished consulting faculty member of Saybrook University, a fellow of the William James Center for Consciousness Studies, Sophia University, and a research associate of the Cognitive Sciences Laboratory of the Laboratories for Fundamental Research. Oh, please. He also writes, thank God, for the Huffington Post. He's been, this is going to take me a minute. He's also been editorial staff member of National Geographic, associate editor of Sea Power. 40 years, he's been studying the nature of consciousness. Okay, that's what I want to talk to him about, particularly those aspects independent of time and space. He's written numerous magazine articles for Smithsonian, for Omni, American History, American Heritage, the Washington Post, the New York Times. And he's produced and written a couple of television documentaries and 4 nonfiction books. The book that we're going to be mostly talking about tonight is The Laws of Change, the 8 Laws of Change. Oh boy, would I like to know them. And how to be an agent of personal and social transformation. You know, you've got to put your credits down to, I don't know, a little bit less, but so you'll have more time to talk because it takes so long. I know the feeling. Happens with age, Stephen, but whoa, I'm so glad to talk to you. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
It's a pleasure to speak with you again.
Now, where should I start? You know, with your own experiences during the civil rights movement in the 60s and in the sociological movements in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and they're studying this social transformation we seem to be going through, and you uncover the science and the patterns behind them all. Here's what I got from your book that I really need to ask you about. There are 3 ways to create social change. The first is the advancement of technology and science. The second change is compelled by physical power and is almost always coercive and violent. And for those reasons, not very long lasting. The third avenue of change, the most successful and enduring, is the one brought about by something so subtle that it is often not even taken seriously. Small individual choices based on integrity and shared intention is the most successful, enduring subject of change. Wow. Stephen, what about the movement of yesterday, this weekend, the kids all outside, please protect us? What is that really going to mean?
I think that actually is going to mean quite a lot, Shirley, because when I looked at that, I mean, you have been an activist a large part of your life, so you have a lot of familiarity with this in your own personal experience. But when I looked at this, I could see the civil rights movement starting up. I could see the anti-war movement. The March for Our Lives is an example of the 8 laws of social change. I mean, what you've got is they follow almost all of the 8 laws. I mean, I want to be clear here.
Right.
I did not invent these laws. What I did was 4 times in my life I've been involved in changing history, and I paid close attention to what happened. Civil rights in the 50s and 60s, the transformation of the American military in the 70s, citizen diplomacy in the 80s, and the environmental movement and the consciousness movement, they're first cousins through all of that. And I've also spent a great deal of time reading about the abolitionists and the suffragettes and various other kinds of movements in the history of the United States. And what happens is when you look at those movements, you forget about the dogma. You just, or the issues, the detail issues, the principles that are involved. What you see is there are 8 laws which are associated with almost all successful social movements. And yesterday's March for Our Lives is a classic example. You've got, first of all, the shared intention of thousands of people who have come together with a common intention to change something. And you see these kids out there. I mean, I completely support this. We lose 92 people a day to gunfire, about 33,000 people a year. I mean, it's like a medical epidemic. If it was a medical epidemic, we'd be up in arms about it.
Right.
So to see that happen yesterday, not only in the United States, but throughout the world,
Right.
there were something like 180 cities that had demonstrations. When you see that, you realize that there is a coalescing of common intention. And that's how Gandhi got freedom for India. I mean, we don't think much about this anymore, but Gandhi was one of the very few people in the whole course of human history who was able to gain independence for his country without a war.
Well, but wait a minute,
and he did
Stephen.
it for those reasons.
Okay, I know that, and I kind of studied him too, and he would not have had that social change without the Salt March, and without his troops stepping up and getting killed,
I didn't say that. The Salt March is a classic example. I mean, if we can, because I'm not sure all your listeners will know this, Gandhi begins as a barrister in South Africa, and he buys a first-class ticket on the railroad, and they won't let him ride in first class. They make him ride in third class because he's an Indian. He's not a white.
Right.
And he gets put in jail because he objects to that. And he comes across Henry David Thoreau's, we don't know how that happened, but he comes across Henry David Thoreau's little monograph called Civil Disobedience. Now you think about this, how much power can a single individual have? So Thoreau is this little eccentric guy who's up in Walden sitting next to his pond, and he writes this thing, and Gandhi reads it, and he realizes this is the way I'm going to get my country independence, through the beingness of the people. And Martin Luther King reads about Gandhi, and he reads Civil Disobedience, and he builds the civil rights movement on it. So one man who wrote this little monograph in the 19th century changed the course of history for 3 countries: Britain,
Stephen,
India, and the United States.
Okay, I get it. Of course. I mean, who would be more appropriately assigned to we need books. It took the book. I mean, if we only need the Bible to know that proof, for God's sake. But look what's these wonderful movements that I and you have been a part of all these years. I'm sorry to sound so skeptical here, but help me believe that what is going to be the price we have to pay? All right, let me ask that. If these kids are going up against the NRA, and the NRA and our political leaders are worried about the money and all that stuff that represents. Now, give me an optimistic answer to that.
Well, the NRA's power derives from the fact that it has figured out that a percentage of the American public are in a kind of fear fugue because there are four big meta trends. We can talk about that in a second, but the power arises from the fact that they have been able to catalyze and keep focused a percentage of the population. What's happening is these kids are creating a counterweight to that.
Yeah.
And I believe that their counterweight is bigger than the NRA weight. I mean,
but bigger than their parents and their elected officials' pocketbook?
Yes, because there are going to be more of them. I found it extremely significant that the March for Our Lives has a very strong bias toward voting. Yes. And if you look at the demographics, the Gen Xers and the kids, the millennials, are going to, by 2019, are going to outnumber the boomers. Mm-hmm. And so they're going to outnumber their parents. And when that happens, I believe these kids are going to be able to achieve what we have not previously been able to achieve, and that is the coalescence of a strong intention collectively in the country that we've got to do something about guns. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. Now, all right, my first other skeptical question would be, that gives us till 2019 for these millennials to get their relationship with their pocketbook straight and their relationship with power straight. I don't know how the NRA achieved so much power, except, and then I have this kind of underneath gnawing little voice in me that says nobody is talking about how much Americans really want to make certain their independence from England is secure. And that's why we have this relationship with guns. Not that somebody's going to come into your garden and, ask you for whatever you got, but the idea that we're still revolutionaries. What do you think?
Well, the Second Amendment came into being for several reasons. One was the American founders were very concerned about having a standing army. And the reason they were very concerned about having a standing army is that during the colonial period, they had been forced to bivouac British officers and troops in their houses. Right. That was, if you were a colonial person and there was a British army group that was in your area, you might have to put up one of the officers and he just moved into your house. Yeah. And they found that really quite unattractive. That's A. B, because we didn't have a standing army, and you'll notice in the Constitution it provides for a standing Navy, but not a standing army. So B, we during the frontier period, where people were going out and there were constant sort of battles, partly because we were stealing the land from the Indians, and also from the French, who were struggling to try to build their empire. It was important that individuals have access to firearms to defend themselves. And we're talking here also, it's very important to recognize, we're talking here about black powder muskets that were accurate only out to about 50 feet. So you wanted to have, since you didn't have a standing army, and since you might have an invasion, a small, a sort of tactical invasion of either Native Americans or of French people, French-American War, you wanted to have people that were out on the frontier have arms. That's B. C, the South wanted to have the Second Amendment because they wanted to be able to arm slave patrols to stop slaves from running away.
Yeah.
And in fact, the reason the Second Amendment is in the Bill of Rights is that that was how they got the Virginia delegation to vote for it, because they were so concerned about slaves running away. So we have three reasons, none of which are relevant to today, that led to the founding of the Second Amendment. And the idea that the Second Amendment authorizes AR-15s is just nonsense. But we don't seem to understand that, because there is an active attempt to sort of forget history. You know, we don't teach civil affairs it's the sort of thing that you would have taken when you were a girl in school, about how you had citizen responsibility and how the country worked and all that. We don't teach that anymore. Most people can't even identify the branches of government. I mean, it's horrifying.
What is the propensity for almost actively forgetting this?
Well, it's because, in my view, there are four big trends that are going on in the world today that very few people talk about, but that are shaping everything that's going on. The first is being born white will no longer confer privilege. The second is being born male will no longer bestow dominance. The third is North American and Western European culture values will no longer be the only way the world operates. And the fourth is the transfer of real power from the nation state to the corporate state, so that the real control is by a very small group of people. And that started with Citizens United. So there's a huge amount of fear in people. I mean, if you look at the social, I study social outcome data. And if you look at that sort of stuff, what you see is you have a large number of people, lower education, almost all white, who are in a fear fugue because they are losing status, because they feel nobody pays attention to them. And the NRA cultivates that fear and blows it up and makes it seem much worse than it is. I mean, you're more likely to have your shirt kill you than a Muslim terrorist.
Oh, God. But what you're really saying is that preeminent from everything, including medicine, neuroscience, biology, quantum physics, the four you just mentioned, what trumps, pardon the expression, all of those is materialism and money.
Yes, we have. The truth of the matter is that the United States now has only one social priority, and that's profit.
Right.
Well, I mean, look at our healthcare system.
Okay, so now you look at, this is exactly what happened in China. I mean, Mao and Zhou Enlai would turn over in their graves that the same thing has now occurred in China. Not that I agreed with communism, but I did agree with the Long March and trying to make a whole revolutionary set of sociological change happen there, and it did. But really, Stephen, what is it about the material that gives us more security in our heads than anything else?
Say that again. What is it about?
About the material, about the things that you can touch, the materialization of reality. Let's put it that way. What is it about that trumps everything else?
Well, it's because it provides immediate gratification. I mean, it's the worship of the golden calf, straight out of the Bible. Come to that.
It wasn't like that before.
No, we have created a kind of ravenous capitalism. I'm not against profit, and I'm not against capitalism. It's just you have to create a society in which wellness is the first priority. And if you look across the world, I mean, I'll just give you an example. Let's take two countries,
Yeah.
Norway and the United States. Okay?
Yeah.
Norway, we'll just talk about healthcare, otherwise it'd go on too long. But we'll just take healthcare. Norway has the 11th best healthcare system in the world. It's not the best, it's the 11th best. And they take 7.6% of their gross domestic product is spent on healthcare to get to the 11th. We have the 37th ranked healthcare system. We're below almost every other developed country. And we spend vastly more than any other country on earth. We spend 17.6% of our GDP on healthcare. Now, why is that? I mean, why is it that we spend multiple times more than anybody else and we get such rotten outcomes? And the answer is because it's not about healthcare. It's an illness profit system.
Okay. So let's stick to the profit system question, because the other thing that is not brought up in these sociological change debates is that maybe we Americans are still suffering from knowing that we're immigrants. And immigrants knew that they had no stash. They knew that the important thing about having the next meal secure was getting the immediate money to make it happen. Are we still suffering from the very thing that we are actually maybe going to go to war about, called immigration?
No, we're going to war about immigration, and all of this immigration stuff is arising because the United States in the second Bush administration chose to start the Iraq war and ended up destroying Iraq and then Libya, and now Syria is being destroyed. And so we have...
Okay, but why did Bush do that?
Because he had a group of people around him, much as Trump has people around him, who actually believe that war can be used to attain access to resources that will make lots of profit.
There we are.
Oh yeah. It's all about profit. I mean, forget about the political arguments.
How did this happen to us? That our brilliant dream in the beginning of establishing an open and free and democratic society through education and so on has now become about how to get richer. How did that happen?
Well, it happened because what was going on in the United States in recent years was an abdication of the idea that the function of society is to produce wellness. If you go back and read the correspondence and the diaries and the things that the founders wrote, Benjamin Franklin, for instance, Benjamin Franklin understood from the get-go that the strength of the country was precisely that it was all immigrants. That when you came to the United States, or it was then the colonial period originally, but when the United States, after independence, that what you did was you gave up your ethnicity and it was there and it was part of your home life maybe, but basically to become an American was to sign up for the idea that we were a nation of immigrants and that it was by working together in support of one another that we could produce both prosperity and freedom, the pursuit of happiness.
Okay, understood, Stephen. But along with that goes that you are now forsaking the wealthy royal government in England, everywhere in Europe, and you have become an immigrant, let's pull together society. And you have decided, I guess, as an American immigrant, let's even say as far back as 1776, you've decided that what's more important is where your next meal is coming from.
Yeah, and how do you improve the life for yourself and your family? And you did that because people came from lots of different places. You did that by joining forces together. That's why Franklin created the first fire company, the first insurance company, the first hospital.
I
Huh?
understand. And I'm just wondering, pardon me for interrupting you. I'm just wondering if this immigrant materialistic society that we formed, new in the world, correct?
Yes.
Isn't, how did that get led off track and not be warned against? I don't remember the founders warning against um, against profit. Maybe you know. Did anybody?
No, no, they didn't. No, no, I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing against profit. What I'm saying is you have to create a society which has well-being as its first for its
Well, I
first
know that,
priority.
but
You can create all the profits you want as long as well-being is the first priority.
well, where did that lose its power? Where did that lose its intrigue? Where did that lose its purpose for the new world in the first place?
When we started, well, I mean, historically, when we changed over from an agrarian to a manufacturing culture, and
So
a tiny group of people began to become preposterously wealthy.
Yeah, and this is where in the 1856 or something, when technology was begun to be worshipped.
Yeah, when we lost track of the fact that well-being as a social priority needed to be the first thing that we focused on, and that was the beginning of why the country was founded. And we gave that up, and we decided to create a culture in which the game was for a few people to get as rich as they possibly could.
Did we know that we did it?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, if you go back to the original, for instance, Supreme Court decisions in which corporations could be treated as people,
Yeah.
I think that's probably, I mean, if I were having to pick a particular moment, I think that's probably what I would pick.
But that
because
wasn't
corporations
until
are not
15 or
people.
20 years ago.
Well, it was earlier than that, but corporations are not people. And then what really did it is Citizens United, because it legalized bribery. I mean, you know,
explain that. Explain that. I don't get.
Well, we decided, the court ruled that it was possible to for interest to give basically unlimited money. And so what we had all countries always have a corruption problem. All democracies have a corruption problem. I mean, all authoritarian governments have a even worse corruption problem. But we legalized it. We said that's where these super PACs come from. You know, when you have people that are putting hundreds of millions of dollars into getting a certain kind of government to reflect their personal values, you got a serious problem, because then what it means is that a handful of people, the Koch brothers, people like that, can put up so much money that they can influence the electoral outcome, despite the fact that it works against the interests of the population that is voting.
And ultimately against them, which they're blind to seeing.
Yes. Yes. The great tragedy is that all these people that voted for Trump out of fear are, in fact, are having policies passed which are going to severely impact them in a negative way.
Oh, they're going to get screwed. Yeah.
Oh, big time.
Well, let's go to, you know, the favorite topic of conversation after you're drunk at dinner. What is gonna, I mean, oh yeah, really, give me your intellectual appreciation of what's going to happen before you see it tonight on 60 Minutes. What's going to happen with this mother? Well, what is
Yeah, I guess exactly. My wife won't listen. She said, I just cannot deal with this. We have a country in which the main principal political conversation is corruption, porn stars, and the abuse of women.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly. Well, because this is the main topic.
It is.
there could be change. You say that the dynamics of change are learnable. Do we have to unlearn what we've been taught?
Yes. Yes, we need to go back and recognize that the first consideration is well-being. What's going to happen tonight? Well, if I were guessing, if I were predicting, I would say they're not going to reveal everything. This is like a burlesque show, in that sense. But we're going to get a little flash. They're going to offer some kind of documentation. There'll probably be some pictures. That isn't all they've got. They've got more to play out. Stormy Daniels' attorney is a very interesting guy because he's an excellent political maneuverer. He really
He's
has
really
been playing it. Yeah, he's very good. Now the question
so
is,
you're talking about ratings. You're talking
yes,
about profit with ratings and television and
yes,
technology in that regard. But I think what I'm really basically asking is, well, regardless, I guess, of what happens with what she reveals or doesn't reveal, I guess what I'm asking is, how mentally ill is Trump?
Oh, I think Trump is a mentally unbalanced man. I mean, I don't see how anybody can argue that. A whole group of psychiatrists that signed a document and
I
wrote
read it.
Yes, me too.
I read.
I mean,
they're
concerned.
Well, but okay, that means.
Here's the question, though, Shirley. Here is, from my point of view, here's the question. Tonight we're going to hear a reveal, not the full reveal, but some of the reveal.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue is going to be, will the white Christo-fascist community abandon Trump? Is there anything at all that can come out that would cause them to abandon him? I don't know the answer to this, because I think these people really, I mean, the hypocrisy of the Christo-fascist view is being fully on display. So I'm not sure. What I am sure about, because we already have social data on it, is that young people are abandoning the Christo-fascist movement. I mean, they're leaving the churches. They no longer subscribe to the social values. So from my point of view, the question is, what happens to his ratings? And do they go down? And I think that's probably what he's worried about. Because if he goes down, I mean, he's at about, this morning I looked, it was 40.9 on 538. So if he were to go down to, say, 30, then you really become vulnerable. The problem is that the Republican Congress is made up of people who are basically owned by the corporate interests that pay for them. I mean, I just, where is the Everett Dirksen? Where is the George Baker? I mean, where are these people? What we may see is, if he goes down, that some of these Republican guys in Congress will actually find some sort of ethical backbone and will begin to speak out about it. That's really what we're looking at. But what I think is important is that the March on Our Lives and the Stormy Daniels 60 Minutes interview are very closely juxtaposed in time. And we're going to see, as a result of that, whether the power of these kids to organize this movement is stronger than the ability of Trump to withstand the revelations that are going to come out tonight. I'm voting for the kids.
Well, of course. But I'm still voting for democracy.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, if democracy has been overwhelmed by materialism and it's still called democracy, I mean, that's what you've got. You can't say it's anything but democracy. 62 million Americans voted that way.
Yes, well, we have about, as I said, we have about a third of the country who are in a fear fugue because they see change occurring. I mean, it's important to remember the United States is going to become a majority minority country by about 2043. I mean, it depends on which study you're looking at, but between 2043, 2050, we're going to become a majority minority country. And
What's that mean?
California, well, it means that there will no longer be any racial group who are the majority. So white people will not be the majority anymore. There will be, and in fact, that's part of this whole thing that's going on all over the world, that being born white will no longer confer privilege, and being born male will no longer bestow dominance. And so that makes a lot of people deeply uncomfortable.
Right.
And the question is, are we going to be able to coalesce a sufficiently large group of Americans who are in support of equality, not only of race, but of gender, and who are willing to really become socially active to make that happen? That's the thing we want to watch for, because if they coalesce, it will go just as the civil rights movement did and just as the anti-war movement did. They will carry the day. And it will be reflected in the 2018 election, and that is what I dearly hope will happen.
Yeah. Yeah, so do I. The one thing we haven't included in this is the role of the Me Too movement and the Time's Up and the women.
Well, that's part of the same thing. Is that women have gotten tired of being made second-class people. If you look at every fundamentalist religious movement in the world, whether it's Buddhist or Christian or Jewish or Muslim or anything else, doesn't make any difference. Every fundamentalist religious movement in the world starts with the premise that women are subordinate creatures. And what's happening in the world is that as women are able to connect through the internet, they are saying to themselves, no, I don't buy that at all. I'm just as good as any man. And as a result of that, we're seeing this whole gender thing. The Me Too movement is starting up. All of these movements are interconnected in relation to these four trends. And you can watch it happening even in a place like Saudi Arabia, where women weren't even allowed to drive automobiles. They are now being able to drive because these changes of gender equality, of racial equality, these are powerful, deep psychic movements within humanity which are beginning to come out. And it's a question of whether they will prevail or whether the suppressive, patriarchal, dominant, authoritarian vision prevails. That's the struggle that's going on.
Well, that's your take. You're forming that question from a left brain intellectual point of view. I would say, what are their husbands and their men going to do about it? What do you think they will?
Well, I think that some of them, as has already happened, are in great support of their wives, just as I'm in support of my wife and the women that I know and the people who have worked for me over the years. But whether that's what I'm saying is, it isn't clear which side will prevail. What I'm saying is, this is the struggle. And the way it changes is by the beingness of individuals. I wrote the 8 Laws of Change book because I could see that Trump was going to win, or someone like Trump, and I wanted to provide science-based information for people to show them how they could claim power and cause change to occur. And it's possible. It's not only possible, it has been proven to be possible. This is not some theory or speculation, that when individuals make different choices collectively, that things change. Look at smoking. When you were a girl and you went over to somebody's house, they had what? An ashtray on the coffee table and a pack of cigarettes and one of those Ronson lighters. Everybody did. You don't see that anymore. Why not?
Right.
Not because anybody passed a law about it, but because individuals made different choices. It's the power of the individual working collectively. There is no force on earth more powerful than the collective intention of a large multitude of people.
Well, yeah, my point, Stephen, is that materialism and money has become the collective choice.
Yes, and so we're going to have to choose different values. Other countries are doing it. Why can't we do it? If you look at the social outcome data, the United States is a deeply unhappy country. I mean, in the ratings of countries of unhappiness, we're not even in the top 25. Why? Because the values that we are espousing as a society officially are completely at odds with the needs of actual individuals humanly in their daily lives. Other countries are doing this. We can do this, but we have to individually make that decision. I tell people every day, you want to change the world, here's how to do it. Every day you make hundreds of decisions, the kind of toothpaste you buy, the gas that you buy, the soap that you buy, whatever. Every day you make hundreds of choices like that. Every one of those is a vote. If you will commit to only choose of the options available to you, the option that is the most compassionate, life-affirming, and fostering of wellness as you understand it in that moment, and you consistently do that, and you tell your friends that you're doing it as a discipline, and you invite them to join you and tell their friends, you can see change happen very quickly. Look at the transition from gay to LGBT. That took place in about 18 months. Nobody passed a law. Nobody went on television and said, from now on, we're going to do. It's that individual sat down, and as they thought about it, they said, that's not only a change of terminology, it's a change of how we think about gender and how we think about sexuality. And they started using LGBT. Look at smoking. Look at what's happening with the Me Too movement. What I think is going to happen now with this NRA thing and guns. This is all about individuals who have no particular power, have no official position, have no great wealth. Individuals collectively expressing through their choices the intention to produce something that creates well-being, and they will not be denied.
Well, okay, but what if that resulted not in what you choose to be life-affirming to buy, but you choose not to buy?
Well, that's a choice. Absolutely. Is that choice going to produce well-being? It's not complicated. When you sit down to do anything you're doing, you are a world famous actress. You make choices about the roles you're going to play.
Oh, come on, Steve. I know all that. But if
no, I know you know all that. But what I'm saying is that at every level, every one of us makes these choices. Doesn't matter whether you're a student in a Florida high school. It doesn't matter whether you're a congressman in Washington. Every day you get to make choices. And during the course of the day, are the choices you're making producing well-being, or are they producing something else? And if you can't say that they are producing well-being, then you shouldn't be making those choices.
Well, if I choose not to buy an expensive big pharma medicine and it affects my health, of course, then it would have a relationship to our health system, which needs to be improved. And maybe if we all got sick, that's how we would get an improvement. I don't know. Maybe that would work. Well, but that's a little dramatic.
Well, if you're talking about health, the choice starts with, am I going to eat this fast food? Am I going to fill my body with all kinds of chemicals and toxins? Or am I going to choose to eat differently? Am I going to choose to buy things which are owned by companies that do have exploitive labor practices, or am I going to choose something that has that is a company that is owned and run on different kinds of principles? That's the whole. these choices that we make, when you see them in aggregate, you can watch what happens. I mean, advertisers have no understand. They understand right away. We get negative feedback, and people stop buying our product. We're going to have to change.
Yeah, but it's still based on the fact that they're not selling.
Yes. Well, it may be that they're not selling, or that people choose to buy something different.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's something that's been bothering me watching the television ads. Why are so many of them becoming violent? On purpose, these companies are selling a car or a washing machine or whatever on an ad that stimulated your fear of violence.
Yes, because fear is a big motivator. That's what the NRA does.
But who's making that? Is that the NRA giving them money?
No, that's the people that make advertising. That's another example. That's the negative example of what I'm talking about. You have people who hire television production companies.
How do they make money with the negative?
They make money with the negative because it stimulates fear and hatred and anger. And that drives people to respond to that. And they know that. That's why they do that.
Is this what happens when you have, you see, this is my basic question, which we're not really looking at. What happens when human beings are free to make their decisions on all levels, and they make them according to what they're afraid of?
Yes.
Rather than what they hope for, or rather than what's even good for them. Why?
Yes. Why do they do that?
Yeah.
Because once you are in a fear state and you have evoked fight or flight, rational thought stops.
I know, but why is it being stimulated to be a fear state? Because
it's extremely profitable.
Yeah, it's money again.
Because we do not pass laws which require, in fact, we're doing exactly the opposite. We're gutting the environmental laws. We're gutting the health laws. We're gutting educational laws. I mean, what's going on in the country, in the United States now, is that all of the things which are designed to produce well-being are being attacked, and they're being replaced with nothing, or with something that actually facilitates the increase of violence, fear, and death. This is a choice. We make it as a collective
I know that,
population.
I'm seeing the manipulation of the choice. And what is behind that, Stephen?
Because look, you work for a public relations company. A client comes in and says, I want you to increase my sales. I don't care how you do it. And so you come back and say, well, let me show you this fear advertisement that I've created for you. And it's going to sell a lot of whatever it is you make.
I know that.
You go, oh, yeah. Well, those are all choices. Do you work for, would you work for Donald Trump? If Donald Trump offered you a job, would you take it?
Me? Are you kidding?
Well, that's the point.
I wouldn't go to dinner. What is the, what is the primary reason that democracy ends up with the people doing this?
Because
it's happening in India.
The reason is that democracy does not have a fixed outcome. It is about polling the people. And when you poll the people, and a large number of them are in a fear state, they respond in that way. So when you create, look at what Franklin Roosevelt did at the height of the Depression.
Fear itself. Yeah.
I mean, he created policies which created well-being, and it kept us going for almost half a century.
Yeah, but he did say the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. So
that's right.
We really attached ourselves to that understanding.
Yes.
What do you see? What do you see when you look forward? I would love to get into another discussion about remote viewing, but it's too complicated to do that here, and we don't have time. But what do you see happening? What is?
Well, I actually am about to start another project. I started in 1978 to 1979. In fact, I'm surprised I didn't ask you to do it. I guess, I don't know. Anyway, from 1978 to 1996, I asked about 4,000 people all over the world, all kinds of people in government, people who were famous, people who were anonymous, people who were rich, people who were poor in probably 15 different countries. And I asked them to remote view the same day in the year 2050. So I don't know, today is what, 25th of March. So I would say to you, Shirley, I want you to go forward in time to the 25th of March 2050, and I want you to be standing in front of the place where you sleep. Now, you notice I don't say your house because I don't want to cue you. I just say the place where you sleep. I don't know what it's going to be. And you describe it for me, and I say, I want you to go to the place where you buy something. How do you pay for all that? Anyway, what came out of the 2050, that experiment, and I asked, how did we get to this place? Just the kind of thing you're asking me.
Yeah.
And what I was told was things like the Soviet Union would disappear, that antibiotic medicine would collapse, that we would have epidemics, that the first of which would be a blood disease that came out of Africa that crossed over from primates and killed millions of people. AIDS, of course. All of this was before AIDS existed. We knew anything about it. Everything that the 2050 people told me has come to pass collectively, not each individual, but the collective, the consensus.
Understood.
Right. I'm going to start another project on 2075. And in fact, I'm just putting it together now because I want to see what the difference is between the 2050 and the 2075. Because when people do remote viewing, which is essentially opening to the non-local aspect of your consciousness and acquiring information that can be objectively verified, what they're looking at is not a predestination. They're looking at probabilities. What is the probability that this is going to happen there? And they're giving you the readout of the highest probability. So I want to see how much they have changed between the 78-96 group and 2018, I'll probably take me a couple of years, 2020. So the question is, what does that world look like? Well, the 2050s saw it as a world in which climate change has severely altered the entire living circumstance of the United States. That there have been three migrations. One migration away from the seacoasts. About 52% of the American population live in what are called coastal counties, and there's going to be mass migration as sea rise floods those cities. Another migration is out of the Southwest, Phoenix, Tucson, Albuquerque, because they don't have enough water. It's all about water, really.
Yeah.
And the third one is going to be out of the central states of the United States as a result of huge climactic catastrophes like tornadoes and things like that. So we're going to have a massive amount of people moving around. And that's going to cause a lot of social disorder. The United Nations is estimating now, at this point, that by the 2040s, there'll be 760 million war and climate change refugees.
Woo.
I mean, this is, people just don't have any idea what's coming. You're going to see massive displacement of loss of land. California is going to be severely impacted. Malibu, I don't know if you still live there, but where you used to live, I mean, that's all going under the sea. San Francisco is going to become a series of islands. Long Beach, all of that area is all going to be deeply impacted. On the East Coast, Washington, all the areas of the Chesapeake Bay area, as the sea rise occurs, the Lincoln Memorial will become an island. The Eastern Shore will disappear. Florida, from about Fort Myers down, will disappear. So you're going to see massive social disruption. for which we're making no preparation whatever. And when you look at Puerto Rico, for instance, or Houston, and you see how badly that's been handled, well, that's how it's going to happen in your community unless something is done about it. So we're not preparing.
And what about, do you see people then beginning to fight one another? Do you see civil
Oh, yeah.
war?
Yes. Lots of social disruption. By 2050, what the 2050 years describe is a lot of smaller communities in which people have essentially tribalized. They've moved into communities that with people that they agree with. They describe the change in the structure of the United States, that the federal system still exists, but that real power has transferred down to the states and regional areas, combinations of states. And you can already see this starting in California.
Mm-hmm.
It describes you're going to have a bunch of failed states. I mean, you know, there are large parts of the United States which really are little better than third world countries. So if you look at the social outcome data, for instance, a baby born in rural North Carolina has less of a chance of getting to its first birthday than a child born in Botswana. Well, there's a huge the difference between just a person in Monaco, for instance. I don't know. I picked Monaco, and Louisiana is about 10 years. A difference between the life expectancy of a woman in Mississippi and a woman in Washington State is about 8 years. So you're talking about some of these states are going to fail because the blue value states are going to become very resistant to continuing to fund the failed states of the red value states. So there's going to be massive disruption of the government and how it operates.
Well, how are you then optimistic, for example, about the march this weekend?
Because I think what's ultimately going to happen, and that's why I want to do this other project, the 2075 project, is that in the end, we are going to awaken. The key to getting through climate change is to acknowledge that consciousness is part of science and that we don't live on the earth, we live in the earth. There's life miles above us and miles beneath us, that we live in a matrix of consciousness, that all life is interconnected and interdependent, and that we've got to stop thinking of the world as an exploitable bank account left to us by a rich uncle. We have to begin to work with the Earth's great metasystems, not against them. But it's going to be very painful and very brutally disruptive. And the more we resist making that awakening move, the more it's going to be worse. So the key is, and I know you're trying to do it, that's what I'm trying to do, it's why I wrote the 8 Laws of Change, is to get people to choose the life-affirming choice and to recognize that we live in a matrix of life, not apart from it. We don't have dominion over it. We have to work with it. We are just one part of a big system.
Right.
And that consciousness is a critical component of that, and that the consciousness that you hold, we know experimentally, for instance, that when large groups of people coalesce in intentioned consciousness, that they literally, we know this experimentally, that they literally alter the nature of reality.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the consciousness that you hold about a substance that you're going to eat literally can have an effect on changing it.
Yeah.
So when we start recognizing that we live in a great metasystem, a matrix, and we begin to make choices which are based on the well-being of the matrix, then we're going to get through. But exactly when we're going to make that choice and how painful it will be to get to that choice, that's not clear.
And speaking of the big picture, and maybe we should do another show on this. How is the extraterrestrial consciousness viewing us at this point, do you think?
Oh, I wrote a novel about that
I
called
know.
Awakening.
Why was it a novel? Why didn't you make it?
Because, yes, the reason was because I realized when I went around to speak at groups that millennials read much more fiction than they do nonfiction. And that if I wanted to get some of these ideas out, I needed to talk in a voice that a fictional voice, because that's what they read.
And that's what they would buy, Stephen.
Yes, they would. Those are the kind of books they buy. Those are the kind of television shows. So I created a story about aliens and consciousness. That's what Awakening is about, and it tells everything that we know in science about this, but also what I think would be the case. I mean, in terms of extraterrestrials, for instance, I think the whole Star Wars war, that's all nonsense. I mean, if you look at history, the British could barely control the colonies in North America that were only a 6-week boat trip away. So the idea that you're going to build empires that cross hundreds of thousands of light years, that's just nonsense. Also, you're not going to be able to go into interstellar space without awakening to the interconnection and interdependence of all consciousness. You know, Max Planck in 1931, the father of quantum mechanics, they asked him, I mean, you know, you're one of the most famous scientists in the world, you and Einstein, what have you learned? And Planck's answer is absolutely critical. He said, what I have learned is that consciousness is causal and fundamental. You cannot get behind consciousness. Space-time arises from consciousness. Consciousness does not arise from space-time. And I think anybody who had the ability to conduct interstellar travel would recognize that, because that's where science is going. And therefore, they would be looking at this very differently. And so the Awakening novel is about how do they look at us and what is it they're trying to do and why are they doing it, based on the best science I could find, plus my own extrapolation of our own research.
Simply speaking, are you saying they don't exist?
No, not at all. No, I'm quite sure they're. No, the idea that we are the only life form capable of technology in the universe is pretty silly if you think about it. Mm-hmm. No, I think that they are. You know, years ago, I was asked to be on a panel at the American Anthropological Association about extraterrestrials, interestingly enough. And my argument then and my argument now is that they are behaving like cultural anthropologists. You know, a cultural anthropologist, when he's studying what he thinks of as a primitive tribe, what does he do? He goes and camps out on the outskirts of the village. He tries to make as little impact on the village as possible. He draws out individuals who talk to him and give him information. And if he's proactively oriented, he may introduce some concepts that might help those people to resolve some problem that.
Okay, do you think any of that has happened with humans?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. I think, in fact, the current form of Homo sapien it may very well. You know, Arthur Kessler told me this at dinner one night. He said, I think that about 35,000 years ago, there was a genetic manipulation of the Homo genus, and that it resulted in a better coordination of the high brain, the midbrain, and the reptilian brain, and that's what produced the development we think of today as Homo sapien.
Yeah. Then how do you say that it's impossible traveling hundreds and thousands of light years to build an empire?
Because why would you want to do that?
I don't know, but suppose somebody did.
Well, I don't see any evidence. I mean, if the business of extraterrestrials was creating empire, well, they'd have taken us over years ago. I mean,
why?
Why? Well, that's the question. Why would they do that? And the answer is because that's not what extraterrestrials are about. They're not interested in creating empires. What's the point? How can you control an empire when you have hundreds of thousands of light years? No, what you
No,
want.
wait a minute, Stephen. You might want to do it because you're in love with the planet itself.
Well, you may be in love with the planet. In fact, I think that's probably correct. You would, if you had the ability to travel interstellarly, you would be in support of life. You would be a life-supporting species or a life-supporting
Well,
civilization.
maybe not if you let them on their own and you found out how they were doing it, which might be exactly what's happening.
Exactly. That's what the Awakening novel is about. The extraterrestrials believe that we are on the verge of destroying ourselves, and they are watching us in the process and are trying to put their thumb on the scale for life-affirming continuance.
Meaning,
and that's what I think they are doing.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if they're just going to let us do the dirty work and pull the plug at the moment that they exactly would understand, and then they inherit the beautiful world.
No. I don't think that's true at all, Shirley. I think what's going on
I'm
is
just wondering.
Yeah, I think what's going on is that they are watching a partially sentient species that is beginning to awaken to the fact that they are more than animated meat, that consciousness is the fundamental. I mean, once you start with that, start with the proposition that there is continuity of consciousness. That is, you existed before you were physically incarnate, and you're going to continue after you die.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what the NDE research is showing us. That's what the reincarnation research is showing us. That's what all of the parapsychological research is showing us, the fundamental nature and the continuity of consciousness. Well, once you start from the idea that there's continuity of consciousness and that consciousness creates space-time, not space-time creating consciousness, well, you have a completely different view of the world and what the true values are. And so I think what we're looking at in terms of extraterrestrials is civilizations that have come to recognize that consciousness is the fundamental and that it is in the interest of all consciousness to support consciousness. And so they are smiling and leaning very discreetly, because if they were to become physically known, that would create panic and disorder. And so very gently, they are smiling and leaning in the direction they hope we will go.
But, I mean, I don't really think we are. And you've
Well, we may not.
telling us that. So
yes, we may not. That's true.
Would they let
I don't see that there's
too?
any guarantee that humanity will survive another 200 years.
And would they let that happen too?
Sure, because then they would bring I covered that in the novel as well. Sure, they would bring along another species, probably the cetacea.
Or like it's already maybe happened with the Anunnaki.
Maybe it has.
Why is the government, I mean, isn't our government and other governments, aren't we aware of their presence?
Yes, I think we are. I think what happens is that there is an enormous fear that if you introduce extraterrestrials into the political discussion, that it would cause panic. And so it all gets suppressed. And also because it makes you immediately weak. You know, because if these people have the ability to fly across huge distances and they have a technology that's so advanced that they can do that, you know, they could take us over. And so if you acknowledge that there are the superior cultures, then how do you make yourself powerful?
And you don't think that's possible?
Think what's possible?
That they fly that long space-time thing, however you want to define it, and that they are watching and they could do whatever they want with whatever we do.
Yes, they could, but they don't. That's the point.
No? What about 2075?
Well, I don't know. I haven't done it yet, but I mean, at some point, I believe we are going to come into contact, but we could not withstand coming into contact with a extraterrestrial culture. It would destroy human civilization.
Oh, really? Why?
Because we would suddenly be faced with the recognition that we aren't the smartest kid on the block. We're not the strongest kid on the block. We're just these little weenie guys. And there's this whole other network of civilizations. I don't think there's one. I think there's thousands, maybe millions, um, that are out there across the universe, and we're not ready to join that confederation.
Well, maybe
we're not smart enough. We're not open enough yet.
Well, maybe it'll have the opposite effect if that did occur. Maybe we would give up our responsibility for ourselves, and instead we would say, okay, you take it.
I would just say to people, the future lies in creating well-being. You as an individual have the power to support the creation of that well-being. It rests with you. The choice is yours. What are you going to choose?
That's okay. I'm just saying, if extraterrestrials showed up, wouldn't we say that to them and say, okay, now it's your responsibility. We haven't succeeded.
But from their point of view, that would not be a good outcome, because then we would simply become a slave culture. You guys take care of it. No, that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to get us to awaken to the fact that we are more than physical meat, that consciousness is something greater than that. And until we awaken to that, I don't think that we can deal with them.
Oh, do you think that they are fighting among themselves sometimes about what to do with this earth and this human race?
Well, there may be disagreements, of course, but no, I believe that the future of civilization, human civilization, lies in becoming aware that we are beings of consciousness first, and that those things which produce well-being are the way we should go. And I don't believe we're going to have any contact until we either are on the precipice of destroying ourselves, or until we awaken to a point where we can recognize that and are sufficiently enlightened to be able to deal with the reality of extraterrestrials.
Mm-hmm. In the role of religions, how will they handle it?
How will the extraterrestrials handle religion?
No, how will the religious leaders handle it?
Oh, badly. Very badly. Because that's all Iron Age thinking. It's all, as I said, if you look at fundamentalism always has three major characteristics. The first is it is always sexually dysfunctional. I don't care. The dogma doesn't make any difference. Fundamentalist religions are always sexually dysfunctional. They always have a complete commitment to the control of women and their bodies.
Yeah,
they all have a sense of self-righteousness and that they are the chosen, and they also at the same time have a sense of persecution. We are the ones who are being persecuted.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that all across the United States. So how would extraterrestrials handle some of them would immediately convert into some sort of new extraterrestrial religion, and the others would go into opposition against it, and it would make them crazy.
You mean the human religiosities would do that?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know what the others who have said for thousands of years, protect yourself. I mean, wait a minute. Bow down to me, I protect you from God and for God.
Yep.
How they would give up that kind of control.
Yep. Well, they don't want to do it. And you can see that you can see that currently in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, I just find it fascinating. In the second decade of the 20th century, that we're trying to regulate how women control their bodies. It's just unbelievable if you think about it. Imagine that if this were reversed and it was men who had something that,
right.
you can see the absurdity of it, and yet It's a major force. In the second decade of the 21st century in the United States, controlling women's bodies is a big deal.
Where does that come from?
It comes from a desire to dominate.
Where does that come from?
Well, we are high order primates, so we organize
Well, is
hierarchically.
it because the male can be more successful at protecting the nest?
Yes. Yes, it's all very primitive.
Yeah.
And the difference is when you wake up and you begin to become a conscious being, instead of just somebody responding to the hormonal impulses, when you actually wake up to who you are and what your responsibilities are, well, then you make very different choices. But if you're just operating at the sort of genetic hormonal level, then, pushing women around seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
If you get a chance, watch the Christian Amanpour
I'm
series.
watching it.
What did you think of the Indian one last night?
It's exactly the point we're talking about.
Yeah.
You can see how these women are beginning to awaken and saying, "No, big boy, you don't control me."
Mm-hmm. And in Japan, I thought it was very fascinating that wife who had not had sex for 10 years now had a secret boyfriend.
Yes.
And that was how she worked it all out.
Yes.
Whoa. Talk about a circuitous culture.
That's right. That's right. Because we are, in order to move into an awakened civilization, we must acknowledge that race and gender are not ways in which you control people.
Yeah.
That we are equal. And that,
one of
fundamental equality is a founding principle of a well-being oriented society.
Well, I'm just wondering the difference between yin and yang, really. That yang is so obvious. It's there. It's forward moving. You can see it. Yin is more hidden. And we're probably more afraid of what we can't see, which is what is basically distributed about women.
Well, the fundamental existential crisis that all males face and have always faced for all of history is that the only way you get into the game is through the legs of a woman.
Mm-hmm.
There is no other way to get into incarnation. So women have a fundamental power that no man can ever have.
Mm-hmm.
And probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, so on some level, every human being, male or female, knows that they are coming in again.
Yes. And that the only way you're going to do it is through a woman's body.
Well, who knows?
Yes, exactly.
Well, with the trends now, we can't really be sure. You know what? One of the people I know who had extraterrestrial contact many times because they were being taught aboard the craft. One of the things they were told and taught was that as of now, in this sector of the universe, there are 7 known genders.
Well, that could be. We know nothing about it. Huh?
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah, we know nothing about any other life forms, any extraterrestrial life forms. So, sure. Mm-hmm. But what I find more interesting, not more interesting, that's not right, but what I find particularly interesting, I went on a binge watching of television last summer because I felt I was losing contact with the culture, popular culture in certain ways. And what I came away with from watching all these, Netflix and HBO series and Stars, all that, is you can remember when Sidney Poitier played in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and the whole deal was a black man was going to take out a white woman. You remember that? Not so very many years ago. Sure. Now you look at television, you not only is interracial romance hot, but you even see transgender romantic relationships.
Well, yeah.
Well, you say, oh, yeah, but can you imagine that a few years ago? No. What's
No, but
happening is
yeah,
the
but
whole.
you just got to it last summer.
No. That's perfectly true. But yeah, I was behind the curve. I admit it. But what the takeaway for me was that the entire idea of gender identity is undergoing a fundamental change, and it's happening all over the world. Now,
Yeah.
in some countries, it's slower than others. In some, it's causing enormous amounts of pain and disruption and violence. But this whole idea of gender and what sexuality means is undergoing change. I mean, you watched the Alampur thing last night about India.
Yeah.
That's an example of that.
But our education in sexual anthropology is about zero. We don't know anything
Absolutely.
about it.
Yes, those people who are in the fear state, the Jeff Sessions and the Mike Pences. No, they're terrified, and they're doing everything in their power. You can see it in the laws that are being passed, anti-abortion laws, anti-choice laws that are being passed. You can see it in the anti-contraception movement that's going on in this country. Anti-contraception, for God's sake.
Do you think that's
That's all male dominance stuff.
Or
now, some women are very comfortable with that. They like to be dominated.
Or is it you are defying God stuff? Of course, God is.
Oh, well, it's framed that way, of course. Yeah. It's not me. It's God's telling me.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, what is the sense of godness with these other celestial species?
Well, I think you have to think whenever you need to separate spirituality and religion.
Oh, well, that's for sure. Yeah.
Well, you say that, but that's very tough for a lot of people.
No, Stephen, I didn't ask that. I asked, what is the off-world concept of God?
I think the off-world concept of God is consciousness. It's not God in the sense that there's some sort of hoary old man with a white beard sitting on a throne somewhere saying, yes, we're going to do this, or yes, we're going to do that, or you ought to do this, or you ought to do that. No, that's not what's going on. When you awaken to consciousness and you recognize that there is a unity of consciousness and that we are all collectively involved with this, and we are contributing to it, and we are influencing it and being influenced by it.
Who
by? It's not an anthropomorphized being. It's the collective consciousness of all of life all over the universe.
Oh, okay. So it is affecting us. What is the consciousness off-world?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. We're all part of the same consciousness. Once you see that consciousness is fundamental and that space-time arises from consciousness, that means that all the planets and everything else is a manifestation of consciousness. It's just on a scale we can't comprehend.
Right. And it changes the nature and definition of reality at the same time.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. I hear that we have to do the rest of this some other time. So
well, we
I
will.
cannot tell you how much I appreciate this. It's been such a fabulous hour and a half. Stephen, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Shirley.
How to be an agent of personal and social transformation. Oh my goodness, by Stephen Schwartz. Thank you so much. Bless you and your wife, and how you handle the fact that she realizes she's superior to you. Thank you so much, Stephen.
You take care, Shirley.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Go into your health and wellness consciousness now and ask if you are going to rise above what seems to be the future.